Hi, everyone. It's May 13th, 2022. This is Talk Back. We do politics, we do arts, we do culture, we do the stuff that's happening every day. And today I have a very special guest who's written a very deep and interesting book about her life as a daughter of two people who were affected by the Holocaust. And when you think about talking about the book, I always think about everyone has their own personal experiences. And I always think about, wouldn't it have been wonderful if I asked my mom, my dad, all the questions about their lives before I was born and after I was born that I really didn't know, would love to know the answers to. And within our own hearts, within our own lives, we carry those histories, whether we really know about them or not. All the secrets, all the trauma is transferred to the next generation. And so my guest today is just a perfect example of how that works and how she had a journey for herself that brought her unbelievable insights and enlightenment. And let me introduce her now, Eleanor Reissa. Hi,
Hi,
Eleanor. It's great to
Sheila.
have you.
Hi. Thank you
Yes.
for such a lovely introduction.
Well, it resonates with so many people. And there are so many Holocaust books out, movies, and I keep thinking, why do we appreciate them? Why do we need to read them? Well, number one, we need to remember what happened to everyone so it can't happen again. But two, uh, it transforms our own lives when we think about it. Whether it's a catharsis or reliving the pain or moving on from it, learning about our own families. And I know that daughters of Holocaust survivors, and I know that word is, we'll talk about that, the daughters of Holocaust survivors have a very special, difficult burden, which maybe you didn't realize until you were later in your life because of what happened to you, right?
You mean daughters specifically versus sons? Is that what you
No,
mean?
no. Well, you're here as a daughter, so I would say
Oh,
all children
yeah, yeah,
of
yeah,
people who've been affected by the Holocaust.
yeah.
Maybe I've done many programs with more daughters than sons, but we're all, and you use the expression, which we'll talk about, the expression of inherited trauma, which is very, very apt. So tell us, Eleanor, let me introduce you first because you have a career, you have a life before you wrote this book. You are a Brooklyn born native Yiddish speaker, a Tony Award nominated director, an international concert artist. You were the director of the world's oldest Yiddish theater, the Folkspieler. You're a storyteller. You have a podcast now, Those Who Were There, Voices from the Holocaust. You are a friend of the Yiddish Book Center, and this summer you will appear at the Yidstock with your ensemble, revitalizing the art of storytelling through Yiddish cabaret. I've seen photos of you, and you are considered the queen of Yiddish cabaret theater with your singing and your storyteller. And today we can talk about that a little bit too, but let's talk about the book. So here you are. Um, your parents have been gone for quite a while, right?
Yeah.
And something compels you to take some letters out of a drawer that you didn't think of doing for years and years. And then that unravels into an entire saga and journey for you. What compelled you to take those letters out of the drawer and this time actually do something with them?
Yeah, I mean, those letters were laying in my drawer for 30 years. My mother died in 1986, and I found these letters in her lingerie drawer, and they were like 56 letters in German. And they were all written by the guy who was going to be my father. They're from 1949, and she was in Brooklyn by that time. She spent the war years in Uzbekistan. He spent the war years in Stuttgart and then in Auschwitz and then on the death march. And they met in Germany when she was at a DP camp and he had gone back to Stuttgart. after the war. And I found these letters when she died. She never told me about them. He died in 1976, 10 years earlier. They divorced in the early 60s. So I don't know why she kept them, and I don't know why she didn't tell me about them, but she didn't. And indeed, I would take them out of my own lingerie drawer and look at them and try to decipher them, and I just couldn't. And finally, in 2018, I had a job on Broadway in a play called Indecent by Pulitzer Prize winner Paula Vogel and Tony Award winner Rebecca Teichman. And I felt, and they had been working on this project for 10 years before it had any action. And I thought, well, if they're including me in their creative world, maybe I should take my own creativity a bit more seriously. And also, a Broadway paycheck for half a year was nice. And so I took that money and I put it towards these letters, and I put it towards I decided to translate these letters and see what would happen.
All right. So let me ask you, Eleanor, that was many years, as you say, after your mother's death and your father. When did your father die?
He died 10 years earlier in
10
1976.
years earlier. So
Yeah,
both
yeah.
your parents were gone. Do you recall yourself having any sense of curiosity about questioning your dad about what happened to him in Europe, in Stuttgart, at Auschwitz, questioning your mother about her life in Europe before she and her family, I assume, fled from, was it Poland,
Poland.
into
Yeah, yeah.
Uzbekistan, where
Yeah.
they stayed during the war, and then she went back and eventually came to America. Do you remember as a kid or a teenager
I
having
do.
any? Yeah.
I do. I mean, look, it's an interesting question, really, right? My father had a number. My father had funny teeth. My father spoke with an accent. My father was not from here. I knew my father was in Auschwitz. I don't think I ever asked him to tell me what it was like. And I think although of course I was curious, I didn't ask him because it's like poking a hole in a wound. And even though I was a young girl, I knew enough that there was a gigantic wound. I knew that. And I knew enough to have the sensitivity to not go poking around. And also it was during the day before people were asking
Mhm.
questions, right? I mean, it was not, sorry, I'm just trying to get rid of that light. It was not like now when there's a Shoah Foundation and the Fortunoff Video Archive on Holocaust testimony and the Holocaust museums. And no, it was before then. It was 30 years after the war, and nobody was talking.
Right.
No, it was not a time when people were talking. And now, if he were here, I would, of course, ask him. And the same with my mother.
Right.
It was the before time
I
when,
know. Yeah. I agree with you because I'm in your generation, and I remember that it wasn't really until the 70s and 80s when the Holocaust became a subject of conversation, of
yeah,
movies, of plays. And I always feel like the world was almost in a collective sense of shock after the war. And it took a while for people to open up. And I had older friends who were survivors of Auschwitz who refused to even talk about it their entire lives. And that's very, very understandable. And that the trauma, though, that your dad and your mom went through does transfer to you, whether you learned the secrets of what happened to them or not. And that's certainly what comes through in your book. So it's interesting that your mom and your dad divorced. So much of your childhood was spent more aligned with your mother and living with her more than with your dad. Is that true?
yeah. I just saw my father on Sundays for lunch. It was a
Mm.
very limited kind of relationship. I would get there around 11 and leave by 3, and more or less that encompassed the entirety of my relationship with him for the 10 years from the time they divorced until I was like 17, and then he had a bunch of strokes.
Mhm.
And then I was with him every day,
Right. So
because
what's so fascinating is how that your book kind of unpeels all the layers of your dad and transforms your entire view of him. You um, didn't have a great, I'll say this, opinion of your dad. You thought he was an outsider. He didn't conform to Americanization very well. He wasn't lucky in his work. Um, and then as you read the letters and did your travels, isn't it true that your father opened up to you as a human being you could finally have some compassion for?
absolutely. I mean, I always had compassion for him. I always felt, but I always felt that he was a loser, really,
Mhm.
is how I would unfortunately describe him, that my father was a loser, that I was the daughter of a loser, and really the only thing he'd ever won, the only thing he was successful at was not being killed by the Nazis. Um, but in fact, I was wrong, and thank goodness that I translated the letters, and thank goodness that I took this journey, uh, this accidental, uh, improvisational journey to Germany, where shockingly to me and to the reader, I think, because the reader kind of goes with me. Is that what you felt when you read it? That like we were on the same journey?
Yes, you want it was unfolding as you took your trip. Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that was a good way to frame what happened. But I think, as I said, your relationship with your dad and you're finding out about the kind of person he was really the eye opener for me in the book. And then, as a corollary of that, your whole feeling about the Holocaust, about survivors, and so on. So, absolutely. But, it starts, I think, with your reading these letters. Now, first of all, let's explain. You are a Yiddish speaker and you can read Yiddish too. Is that right?
Yes, but my Yiddish reading is slow. I mean,
Okay.
I can read Yiddish, but it's slow. I mean, it's
Okay.
slow going. I can
Yeah.
read easier when it's transliterated into English letters than when I have to read the Hebrew letters, but I
Right.
can. I definitely
Yeah.
can.
And the letters that your dad wrote to your mother, she had already come to America after being in a DP camp in Ulm,
Yes,
ULM, in
yes,
Germany. He was in Stuttgart, and I guess he was preparing to get their
yes.
sponsorship to
I mean,
come.
he was
And
waiting for his visa, yes,
right,
and she got hers.
so those
Sorry,
56 letters were sent for a period of just some months in
6 months.
1949, six
Yeah.
months, right? So the first thing you discover, which I think is that, wow, my father has a romantic heart. He's writing these letters to my mother. And tell us, you want to read the passage from one of the letters that,
Yes, I
if you
kind of
can find
I
that,
just have to
where
find
you
it.
said, wow, I never expected to have my father talk that way.
Yes, I mean, he writes, this is from a letter in 1949, 14 August 1949. My dearest Ruchale and Shamale. So Ruchale was my mother, and Shamale was her son, Shamshin. And in Yiddish, the le suffix that you can put it on anything, on any noun, including a name. Uh, it's an endearing suffix. It means your beloved. Like you say, a
Mhm.
yingle is a little boy, but a yingale is
Right.
even a littler boy, and more a maidale. It means little, but it means extremely, extremely beloved. So anyway, he writes, "My dearest Ruchale and Shamale, although I have not received a letter from you, I am writing to you nonstop. I understand that you have your hands full until everything is in place, but please realize how happy it makes me to read some words from you, my love. As to my coming to America, I can only tell you, my darling, that I would fly to you if I only had wings.
Yes, it's beautiful.
And I think, who wrote that? Who
Right.
who
Well,
wrote that?
you loved
That
your
was
mom.
that was not
Yeah.
the guy. I didn't know that guy. I didn't
Right.
know I didn't know that guy was capable of that, of such feelings or thought like that or wrote like that. And that was just the tip of the iceberg, really.
Right. So you already have a new view of your father. Of course, so many of us have a hard time imagining our parents in love, right? Our parents doing the act that brings us into this world. But it also it struck me that there are no letters from your mother to your father.
Correct.
And one of the words that came to me, and we'll go through it, is he was deeply in love with your mother. They finally united in America. But your father was betrayed by a lot of things in his life. I find that word, um, his life in Stuttgart, and we'll go into that. But at least this is the height of his romantic fire to come and finally be together in
Yeah.
America with your
You
mother.
know, I never used, it's an interesting word, Sheila. I never used that word about his situation, that he was betrayed. And in part I didn't use it, and don't necessarily use it, especially in relation to my mother, who you're alluding to one of the reasons that things didn't work out with them, was that he accuses her of having uh, a lover, right? Uh, but she too was a, uh, I don't want to use the word victim, but I guess I will. Her life was shaped by the horror of the Holocaust. So she was born in 1922. So in 1941, when the pact with Poland, with Germany and Russia, that they took over Poland, her at age 19, that was her world, was World War II, the Holocaust. And that, so I feel very much like, unless you're turning somebody over to the Nazis or something like that, the betrayal was the world who betrayed them, who let them have that awful fate that befell all of those people. You know what I mean? He did wrong, she did wrong. There was a 20-year age spread between them. They were both hungry for love and affection, and that it didn't work out. Um, I can't say, I don't know what a lousy husband he was, right? I just know it from his point of view that he feels betrayed. If we would have had
Yeah.
testimony from her, we would learn perhaps that he hit her.
Yeah.
You know what I
No,
mean?
yeah. I am not the
No,
word
I
is
know.
not just in his relationship with your mother. You do state pretty much categorically in the book that your mother did have a love affair with a
She
cousin,
did.
right?
She
She
did.
did. So whether
Yes.
and I understand that there are always two sides,
Yes.
but
But I just want to
from
say
his
that,
point
yes.
of view, he felt that. But it wasn't that. That's only one element. When I use the word betrayal, I'm talking about, and we'll get to it, his life in Stuttgart. He loved Germany. Germany betrayed him. Uh, the
America betrayed
Auschwitz
them.
betrayed him. His life was a series of
Ugh.
unfortunate one thing after the other. His son betrayed him, and that's what. Let's talk about this now. Okay,
Okay.
so it's not just your mom's relationship with him
No,
that
but
grabbed me. It's the
similarly,
whole
I
thing.
just want to similarly, his son was also a victim of the war.
No doubt. I'm talking
You know what I
about it
mean?
from your dad's point of view.
Yeah,
No doubt.
yes, that's
No
right.
doubt.
That's right.
No doubt.
And
From
from my
his,
dad, yes, no, I know, and but from my dad's point of view, this was what we're referring to, for those who haven't read the book, is that I uncovered testimony, sworn testimony that my father gave in 1947, but then again, different testimony in 1967 when he was trying to get reparations from Germany, and he had to speak to a psychiatrist, a German psychiatrist, and disclose everything from his life. How's he doing? What
right,
does Germany need to pay for? And Germany needs to pay for this terrible life that he now has, also in addition to Auschwitz, in addition to his first wife being murdered and his first daughter being murdered. And in
yes.
addition to all that, this is now what his life turned into, from a vital citizen of Germany into a sweatshop working illiterate loser in America.
Right. So this is the picture that this is why I use that word.
Yeah,
Obviously, your mother has her story, her shortcomings, her rationale, his son. So, but I do want you to set the stage. Both your parents were married before and
yeah,
had children. So your
yeah,
mom had Shamala
yeah,
Seymour, right?
yeah, yeah.
He's your half
Half
brother.
brother from my mother. He was born in 1941, so you can do that math. I mean, and you can wonder how in the world can somebody have been born in Poland in 1941? I mean, what child lived through that horror as a newborn?
So when
But
the
my father,
yeah,
sorry, and my father had two children with his wife, and they were older. He had a son, Harry, who was born in 31, uh, and a daughter, Frida, who was born in 34. So that's correct. And and due to the research, not due to what somebody told me, because nobody told me anything, due to research, I found out that his first wife and daughter were on a transport out of Stuttgart in 1942 and were murdered at some point between February 1942 and June of 1942. Where, how, unknown, many options for the possibility of their death.
so Eleanor, when you were growing up, you did not know this about your father's first wife and daughter, Frida?
No, or
Did
son,
you?
Sheila. I didn't know about his son, who's still alive, who was sent to England on a kinder transport in 38. No, I didn't know about him until I was 14. N-
Wow.
I didn't know because the year that I was born, first of all, my father went to get him. So this son was sent on the kinder transport. His life was saved. His parents, my father and his first wife, put the boy on a kinder transport just after Kristallnacht in 1938 and sent him to England, where he was taken in by a wonderful non-Jewish family who had three daughters of their own. And then my father was sent to Auschwitz, and then the mother was killed. And then my father was on the death march and lived through that, but didn't get back in touch with England for almost 10 years. And then had to wait for a visa to get to England to fetch his son. So the boy, my half brother Harry, was in England without parents, or better, with the British parents, from 1938 to 1948. So from age 6 to age 16. So Harry, by the time my father went to fetch him, Harry had spent more time with this family than he had with his own parents, with his birth parents. And when my father went to fetch him, my father, who spoke no English, my father, who looked ravaged ish, compared to a British physician and their family, educated, well-bred, blah, 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 the boy did not want to go with my father. And so that
Yeah.
is so the year that so then my father went to America, married my mother. I was born 3 years later. And the year I was born, Harry married a non-Jewish woman and took the name of that British family that had raised him for all those years. And my father stopped speaking to him. So the year I was born, my father stopped speaking to his son. And it was not until I was 14, my parents were divorced for a bunch of years. My father was already in his mid 60s that he said to me, "You have a brother."
Wow. So again, I'm keep putting that in my sort of betrayal basket. I can understand your stepbrother. What's his name? Harry?
Yeah, my half brother.
Harry. I can understand his point of view. But again, I'm looking at it from your father's point of view.
Yes,
At every
yes. The
stage
injury, yes.
of life, he was thrust away. Granted, your parents, what happened in the privacy of their marriage, no one knows, and he may not have been good to your mother. But again, he seems to have been thrust out of Stuttgart, out of Germany, out of his son's life, out of his life with you. You only saw, and now the picture of him is coming more into focus, and you have to extend an amazing amount of, I think, compassion to him that I felt that you as a kid and then as a young adult did not give to him, that all these revelations from the letters and what you found out. Am I right? Is this?
Yes, I mean, compassion. I did. I don't mean this in in a defensive way. I did feel compassion toward him always. I knew that he was a suffering person, and I did always feel badly for him. I didn't always want to sacrifice my life and my time for him because I was young and wanted to be free, and I did not want to take care of my father. Ultimately, I did, even though I was not excited about doing so, but I did do so. And and the it, I mean, the book is about him. It's not about my mother.
Well, I think the book is about you.
Oh
The
yeah,
book is about
that
you.
too.
Your,
That too, about
it's
me.
about, it's you. It's all you. It's your revelations, the enlightenment that you get. So let's set the stage for these revelations. It's so interesting. The letters are just like the opening salvo. They really don't tell the story. They're the roadmap to what you really are going to find out later. So you found out in the letters that your father has a passionate romantic side, but there's not that much information in the letters, but you're going to get them translated. But it's the journey after that. So talk about that, how the letters are really just the roadmap to the unfolding of the story.
So I mean, it's so bizarre at this point looking back. So I knew that my father lived in Stuttgart, right? After the war, before the war, I did know that. I knew that my mother and my grandparents and her son and my uncles spent the post-war years in Ulm in a displaced persons camp called Donnerbastion. I knew those things. And I thought it never occurred to me to go to Stuttgart or to go to Ulm, because I thought, what for? What's there? Everybody's dead. There's nothing for me to find out. So what these letters did was the woman, I mean, it was sort of bashert. Everything kind of seemed like it's meant to be. That's right. A kind of shocking destiny where manna fell from heaven at every step of the way without my really asking, without my anything. So the woman who became the primary translator, because there were 3 of them, 56 letters when you're not hiring a full-time professional translator take a long time and a lot of money. And I was skirting the issue a little. I paid this one part-time, I paid that one part-time. But the first one was this woman, Yeva Lapsker, who lived in Berlin. And I was doing a concert with Frank London in Berlin in 1986. And I had commissioned her to translate the first 10 letters, and she lived in Berlin. I was going to meet her for coffee while I was there. She was going to give me the letters. I was going to give her the money. And we're sitting in a coffee shop, and it's very warm between us because she now knows about my father, and she's a compassionate, lovely woman. And at one point in the conversation, she said to me, you know, my brother lives in Stuttgart, she says. I said, oh, that's nice. And I'm planning on visiting him in January. This was November when she said that. I said, oh, good for you. And she said, you know, my brother lives around the corner from the address on your father's letterhead.
Wow.
I said, what? She said, yeah, right around the corner from that address. So since I'm going, I don't mind going a little early. And if you want to come with me in January, and then we can go to Ulm, which is just an hour away. And I thought, what? And so that happened. And at that same trip, Frank's manager, this fellow Lutz Engelhardt, Frank had told him about the letters. And I was talking to Lutz, and Lutz, I mentioned this town that's in the letters also called Ludwigsburg, which I'd never heard of. And Lutz says, Ludwigsburg? I know people in Ludwigsburg, and I know people in Stuttgart. And if you go, let me know, and I'll contact them, and they'll help you. And I'm like, what? And then, as though that weren't enough, I get a call from a friend of mine in Israel, my friend Evan Fallenberg, who is a writer and has like a boutique hotel that is in Akko, that his intention is to turn into a writer's retreat for 2 weeks a year. And he calls me and he says, listen, I'm ready to do the writer's retreat. Are you working on anything? Because the writer's retreat is going to start the second week of January, which would be just after I would go to Germany, if I would go to Germany. And I just thought, well, okay, all right, I'm going to do this. I'm going to take this journey. And that's what the book is about, this
Eleanor,
journey.
they just gave you just got the framework for the whole book.
Yeah.
Right? All you need to do is fill in the pages, and which is what you did.
It was easy, Sheila. Yeah. Anybody.
Well,
yeah.
No, writing isn't easy. But my point is, it's as you said, by shared destiny, that you managed to put those experiences together, and it was the whole framework for the book.
It was. That's
and
what
so
happened.
It was the letters led you to address, led you to friends in Berlin, in Stuttgart. And then as you were there, you went to archives. You had people reading the archives with you, emailing madly so that you have enough time to get the information. And so what were the most eye-opening things that you found from the archives in Ulm, or in that Ludwigsburg, and in Stuttgart?
I was there for 5 days. I was in Germany just for from basically Monday to Thursday. I arrived Sunday, I left Friday. This trip was 4 days long. And within these 4 days, I went to the displaced persons camp. First of all, I'd seen it in photos. I never really understood what it was. I never really understood anything about it, really. And there it was. I went there. It still existed. Why I never went there before? I, I mean, it's just kind of shocking to me, my own sort of stupidity, I will bravely call it. Um, and so going there was I don't know, there are places like sometimes the Western Wall in Israel, like the first time you go there and you go toward the wall, and it almost feels like the wall emanates history, that you go to it and you can feel things from this inanimate object. These stones seem to speak. Same thing I found when you go to Gettysburg. I mean, it is hallowed ground. The death and struggle of thousands and thousands and thousands of people doesn't seem to die, it seems to me. And that's what happened at the displaced persons camp. That kind of began the walking into the past and finding myself a little bit time traveling uh, and running into the dead who I miss very much. I mean, and so that began in Ulm, and then my in the letters and on some photos, my father spoke of this fellow Joseph Varsha, but in the letters you couldn't really make out, was it a WARHERWANLER, in script, and we had no reference to know what the name was. In Ulm, we met this rabbi who had really nothing to tell us. He was a Chabad rabbi in this new synagogue in Ulm, which was new because the original synagogue was burnt down in 1938 in Kristallnacht, right? I mean, why is there a new synagogue? That's why.
Right.
That's why, right? So you start to understand modern history when you look at ancient history. And anyway, this guy says, look, I don't really know about the Jews. He was an Israeli Chabad guy. And he said, but there's a woman in Stuttgart. Her name is Eve Varsha, Warscher. And he says this to me. And I think, and when Yeva and I leave the rabbi, we look at the photo and Warscher. I mean, could it be that this woman is in some way related to Joseph Warsha? And then we find out, and I'll tell you, I mean, you can read the book, but if you don't want to, it was his daughter.
Wow.
So, I mean, I'm not looking for his daughter. I'm not looking for him. I don't think, I don't know who he is, how to spell his name, I don't know anything. But I connect to his daughter, and his daughter, as it turns out. So the letters are filled with names that mean nothing to me, nothing, like from a phone book, letters. And I meet her, and I show her the letters, and she reads it handily, right? She knows German, she reads it handily, and she says, "Oh, Helfer. Oh, he was my cousin. Oh, Orfner. Yes, Orfner used to live." So the letters are now alive, first of all.
Right.
I mean,
right.
and not only that. So here's a takeaway, right? She turns out to be 5 days older than me. I mean, just 5 days older.
Wow.
So her father, my father's best friend, had a child in May of 1953, just like my father had a child. But her father stayed in Germany. Her father remained a prominent member of the community. Her father had these friends for all of his life. My father left the community to be with my mother, which didn't last. He wound up living a life alone and isolated and empty in America. Had he stayed in Germany, he would have had a very, very, very different life. And I know we never think that way, but that is something new to, refugees don't always get it better when they leave their home and come to the
Right.
golden streets of America. It's not
Right.
always better for them.
Yeah. Now, would have
So
been interesting to know, Eleanor, if your father stayed in touch with this Joseph Warshaw
I
or
believe
other.
he did. I
You
believe,
think so?
yes, I do. I do because uh, I, I, I mean, I, it's not in the book, of course, and that you're saying that to me is now tripping a
Hmm.
couple of old cells in my file index cards in my brain that I I do think he stayed in touch
He
with
may.
Varsha all of his days that he was able to. And look, I didn't know anything when I was a kid about, and I say kid, I mean, he died when I was 23. So, and he got sick when I was 17.
Mm.
And I had to put him in a nursing home from the time I was 17 to 23, the time he was 70 to 76. So, and I didn't know to ask. It was all, I I mean, I was a teenager and wanted to
Sure, of
be.
course, it's understandable, and it's just so amazing that these revelations just kind of fell in your lap, right? I mean,
And now I know them, Sheila.
yeah,
Now I know. I mean, it's a little late, but what's the expression? Better late than never.
right.
And
So, yeah,
so that was an enormous
there, yeah,
revelation. Also, that my father left Poland in 1920 after the war. Kind of, he left the small shtetl where his well-to-do parents lived to join his brothers who had made a life for themselves in Stuttgart. Everyone who stayed in Poland was killed.
yeah,
Every member of my
yes,
father's family who
right,
stayed in Poland was killed, and those who left Poland before the war and before the war and after World War One were not killed by the Nazis.
right, yeah. Just a couple of more things, and before we get to the what happened in Israel, when you were reading the reparations application, that's a biggie that comes later. But didn't you also try to recreate the photo of your parents at the river in Stuttgart? You didn't
I
have enough
did.
time. You finally
No,
gave up and what?
I
Yeah,
mean, my all these people, what we didn't speak about in a way is that I didn't do any research on my own, right? I didn't. I'm like a hippy dippy artist who, I kind of feel things. I'm not from the big research people, but people did research for me. And so all I wanted to do, Sheila, was find the place where this photo was taken or
right.
that photo was taken. But instead, I went into the crypt. Instead, I went into the crypt and was an archaeologist and got I found the bones of my ancestors.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
consequently, I know what my bones are from. And they're
yeah,
not what I thought,
yeah.
you know?
So that was in so in Stuttgart, you found a wall of names, right? A very eye-opening experience for you because your father's child, Frida, who perished in the Holocaust, and her mother, your father's first wife, were on the wall. And you had never thought of her as your sister. Talk about that.
So I'm going to talk a drop about this wall first. It was the last day of my time in Germany. And, it was like, where are we going? We're going to a memorial. Germany is filled, thankfully, right, with memorials, with acknowledgments of the damage that they did, the murder they committed. I mean, the country is full of such memorials. But, but I've been going to them for the last 3 days, and I thought, "Oh, another memorial? We're going to," I'm really memorialed out. But this was the last memorial. It was called the Transport Memorial, and it was in a train station where Jews were transported basically to their death. And so we went to this memorial, and it looked like Maya Lin's Vietnam Memorial. It was like, basically a group tombstone. And I don't know. So I'm walking, and and it begins at the letter A, and all of the names A. And so the light bulb goes off in my head, and I'm walking, I'm thinking, okay, MNOPQRS. S, I walk a little slower. SCH, a little slower still. And then I come to SCHL. And I try to explain in the book what that felt like, to expect nothing. And that's part of this other thing about the book and trip. I expected nothing. And I get to this, and there's my name, Schlüsselberg, my name. It's my born name. And there it is on this wall. And there's Hannah Schlüsselberg, my father's wife, and Frieda Schlüsselberg, who I always just thought of, not always when I found out about her, which wasn't until after everybody was dead. So in the 1990s, I found out about her. And I just thought of her as Harry's sister and my father's daughter. But I realized that she was my half sister. And I said Kaddish while I was there. And in a way that completed the trip that I made. I there's this poem. Can I read this poem, Sheila? It's
Sure.
short.
I wanted to read what you wrote in your book about that visit. You read the poem first, and then I will read your passage from your book, which I want to read.
Okay. This was, so after I said Kaddish, I went there was like an overhang where they had stuff about the place, about where we were, which was this transport memorial where no one returned. Everyone who was on that wall was killed.
Right.
And as it turned out, my father, who had been transported a year later in 1943, was the only one from his transport who returned. And I thought, really? My father? The loser? Anyway, this is a poem by an Austrian Jewish poet named Erich Fried. And it was written in German, Gesprach mit einem Überlebender. But in English, it is this: spoken to a survivor. What did you do that you should not say? What did you do then that you should not have done? Nothing. What did you not do that you should have done? This and that, and some other things. Why did you not do it? Because I was afraid. Why were you afraid? Because I did not want to die. Did others die because you did not want to die? I believe yes. Do you have something to say about what you did not do? Yes. I ask you, what would you have done in my place? That I do not know, and I cannot judge you. I only know one thing. Tomorrow, none of us will be alive if today we once again do nothing.
That is beautiful. And I think we underestimate the feelings of shame, guilt, horror that people like your father had who did survive, you know. And your father was strong. He was of a generation that could do the work. And so when it came time for the selection at Auschwitz, he was sent to the workers, and his strength and courage kept him going and helped him to stay alive. But you don't know what's in the hearts of those survivors for what they did, to stay alive. But I want to read what you wrote, Eleanor, as you were at that wall and saying Kaddish, because I think these are beautiful words from you. Can I read that? You said, you're saying, what could you say to her? Meaning, what could you say to your half sister, Frida? You said, what could I say to her as I stood there being held up by this wall of the dead? My whole life had been held up by these people, these silent, screaming names, innocent human beings who came here to be transported, who never returned, whose life and death were responsible for my own life. It was their death, the murders of Hannah and Frida Schlüsselberg, that literally made space for me. Their absence was my presence. The next other Schlüsselberg daughter, I would fill the void that they left. I think you said that beautifully.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. It was, I mean, so here I am now today. And I think, did that all happen? Pre-COVID, like it was like such a brick of time, right? It was just
Right.
this block of time that I managed to have, that I managed to take, that I managed to learn all that. Like, holy mackerel,
Right. But then
wow.
the next
Yeah.
big punch of information comes when you get to Israel, and then you are sent the full history of your father's application for reparations. And in that applications, it is a biography of his life. And you learn every twist and turn of his time in Auschwitz, the death march, how he survived that. And you must, your eyes must have been open to a different view of your father because of that. And you read that stuff in a beautiful setting. You were there with your friends in Israel, right?
Yeah.
Uh, and the water in a lovely resort. And here you are reading that. Tell us about all the feelings you went through when you did that.
Well, we found this Yeva, my translator and tour guide in Germany, found 30, 30 pages of everything we found was in German, and we had limited time, and we knew it was important, but we didn't have time to translate it on that trip. So at that time, I sent out, of the 30 pages, I sent 5 to her, 5 to Lutz, 5 to my friend Tina, 5 to this. And there I am in Akko, the seaside, the beautiful northern Israeli seaside resort, kind of. And every day, the translations are starting to arrive in my inbox. And I have no idea what I'm going to be reading and what's in them. And kind of that's how it was. I mean, they started to come in, and and I I mean, I was blown away, understatement. A lot of weeping for my father, his experience. I knew my father was on a train. I knew my father, to Auschwitz. I mean, I knew that here, I knew that. I knew he must have worn a yellow star. But at a certain point in my life, I stopped thinking that. When I looked at photos, I stopped looking for him in those photos of, the frozen, starved men in their striped uniforms, skin and bones men. at one point, I looked for my father in those photos. And at a certain point, I stopped looking. I didn't expect to find him. And I kind of forgot that he was one of them. I forgot that he was on that train. And what I knew about the train, but I forgot that my father was on the train. And in this testimony, I learned, like from his words, what it meant, what those 4 days, day and night on that train was for him when they opened the doors, and then when they beat the Jews, and then when they shouted, "Get out, you pigs," and all of that. Oh, these are my father's words about what happened to him. And this beating, and that starvation, and this, and on and on. And I mean, I thought really, Sheila, I always wanted to know that. And in fact, I am glad I know that now. However, I mean, it was, it's shocking. I mean, how do you go on when you know that happened to your father? Well, and you do go on. How did he go on? He went on, I go on, we go on. It's kind of amazing how resilient people can be, but it's shocking how much they can endure. And it was from that testimony that I came to what I think is the greatest revelation of my trip. Can I read that part, Sheila, the takeaway?
Sure.
I mean, and this to me, is, it will change me, and I think will change the reader for always. So this is what I call the takeaway, and it comes, of course, at the end. It's been more than 2 years since I was in Germany. Before I went there, I knew nothing. Now I know a little bit more than nothing, but still not everything. The darkness that has been with me all of my days is clearer now, more defined, based on facts rather than shapeless shadows. The sources of my sorrow are labeled and filed and have a beginning, although not an end. That will die when I die. There is also a reawakened paranoia. My senses are more alert to nationalism and bigotry. The sound of marching boots and the smoke in the distance make me wonder about packing my bags and where and when to flee if the bastards get too close again. What means too close? I am witnessing history mutate and repeat. So soon? I am certain, even though I'm not a scientist, and even though I've done little research, that my own rage, of which there's plenty, and my existential fear and consciousness of death, and my sarcasm and greed and empathy, all of these things and more come directly from the womb in which I was born. My genes contain the chromosomes of memory, my parents' memory,
Don't go on the computer.
inherited trauma. My chromosomes remember the years of starvation, the years of freezing, the years of beating, the constant flinching, waiting for the next blow, preparing for the pain, the trauma of being whipped on the box, the hiding and the smoking and the clipping of hair, and sleeping on the wooden shoes, and being secretive and being wily and being scared to death and scared of death. My radar is locked on to the stink of anti-Semitism and racism, as well as the cruel arbitrariness of extermination. A simple turn to the right or left can hasten the end or can equal the end. How can you ever be careful enough? That my father felt I was the reincarnation of his first daughter, Frida, saddened and surprised me. And yet I felt that too, that I had been given her life, that all of her bits and pieces had magically, karmically recombined to become me. The cosmos would not permit her to die forever. because her life was stolen. The crime was corrected. I am the correction. I am Frida's justice, Frida's revenge. My life is revenge. That's one part of this takeaway, the part about me, about how and who I am and why. Is my anger and irreverence a bit more understood, forgiven? I hope so. There's something else, though. Something I've been holding inside for these 2 years, waiting for this moment to say here and now. I will repeat these words again and again until the very end of my days. My father and the others who lived and died during that time in that place were not survivors. No, I reject that term. Those people did not survive. Cows survived, dogs survived. What those people did, all of them, not just the ones in the ghettos or the forests or the basements or the camps, was fight. They were fighters. Whether they lived or were killed, they fought. With every molecule of their breath and brain and brawn, they fought to live. With all their might and their heart and prayers and selflessness and selfishness and guns and books and pens and bread, they were Holocaust fighters, not survivors. In the cattle cars, up the chimneys, in the attics and tunnels and sewers, they fought for their lives, for our lives, for my life. I am not the child of Holocaust survivors. No, I reject that passive, minimizing, head bowing term. My father never bowed down his head, he said. Well, why should I? Why should we? Words count. I, Eleanor Reissa Schlüsselberg, am the daughter of Holocaust fighters, courageous humans who fought the devil like hell for life to the death. Can you imagine if the world had called them Holocaust fighters? To have been the daughter of fighters rather than the daughter of survivors. I would have been Supergirl, for goodness sake, strong and proud rather than an ashamed, hidden light.
Well, that's beautifully expressed, and you carried it forward in your discussions about Yiddish and Israel, which I found so interesting and resonated with me because that view of a survivor, of people who did not fight, came the view of a lot of the world before Israel came into existence. And the Eastern European Jews like Ben Gurion and others who were the founders of Israel wanted to get away from Yiddish and from the survivor kind of mentality. And that's why Hebrew became the language in Israel. You talk about that in your book, don't you?
Yeah, yeah, I do. And I understand. But because look, they called them survivors and they said people said they went like sheep to the slaughter. And there were just pockets of fighters, the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising or the Lodz Ghetto Uprising or the 1 or 2 or 40 or 100, a few hundred partisans in the forest. The world did not, and Israel did not acknowledge all of the Jews, religious, not religious, teachers, bricklayers, greengrocers, who fought to stay alive.
Right.
They did fight. They did
Right.
fight.
And
Some
so
of them
you're getting
failed. 6
right.
million of them failed, but they were
They
Muhammad
fought.
Ali. They might have lost the fight, but they were fighters.
Right, right. But so you're, as you said, you're getting your revenge. And another wonderful revenge that I share with you is that Yiddish is being revived. It's coming alive again. It's alive in Israel. It's alive everywhere. And you're one of the foremost people that's carrying that revenge forward, keeping Yiddish alive, singing. So let's turn to some of the images that will, help
Sure.
explain a little bit
Thank
what
you,
you
Sheila.
talked about
This is
before
such a
we finish.
nice talk with you. It's so, thank you so much in advance. I'm thanking you early, but go ahead.
Okay, I appreciate it. And
Sure.
let's see what we have. Can you see this? The slideshow? Can you see it?
Yes, I see it.
Okay. So here you are, Eleanor Reissa, singer, actress, director, writer.
But that was before I stopped coloring my hair. I'm
Oh,
out.
okay.
I'm out of the closet. COVID brought me out of the closet. This is me now. That's my mom.
Okay.
That's my
All
mother.
right.
Beautiful
Yeah.
mother.
Okay.
Ruth Hoff.
And
That's my
that?
father. Yeah, that was before the war. That was in the late teens or early 20s. And I mean, that's a pretty good story too, right? From the book that I asked to meet a costume designer because I don't know anything about this photo. And she proceeds to analyze the photos and explain who these people are, my family, on the basis of what they were wearing, which was pretty
Wow.
great.
So what did she tell you about your
Hmm.
dad?
She told me, she called my dad a clothes horse, for goodness sakes.
Uh-huh. Wow.
And in America, Nebuch, you know, he was in the nursing home. He was dependent on what I brought him, which was the lowest common denominator of clothes. And but he himself, these were all handmade, tailor-made clothing
Right.
that he had, and this was just one of many outfits. So I he was betrayed. You're right, Sheila, by me too.
Wow. So could you imagine looking at this photograph of this dapper young man on the move, what his life would have been like if the Holocaust hadn't happened? Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I almost think it would have been the life that I have now. I mean, look at my life. It has been so, I don't want to say easy, but I never lacked for anything. And I mean, but if I knew that my father cared, dressed like that, I might have been, I might have taken better care of myself too. It was quite an example he could have set had he been able to.
Now, when did these photos come to light? Did you have them all along, but never really paid a lot of attention to them? When
I
did you
mean, I
get this?
paid it. I had like this photo when he died. Either I was sent photos from somewhere. Ich gedenk nicht. I don't remember how I got my hands on all of these photos, but enough people die, you get their photos, if you know what I mean. And
Right.
I was always interested in these photos and looked at these photos many, many, many times, but I didn't know what they meant. I didn't
Right.
understand where they were from or anything. And that's indeed that's the photo, that's the magic photo that I was trying to create. It's from 1947 and it is in the city of Ulm, and that is the church, the highest spire in Germany is in Ulm, and that's my father and my mother, and they played those perspective games. Oh, I have many photos or a number of photos like that. And the river is the Danube. I didn't know anything. I mean, I've looked at this photo since I'm a girl, hundreds of times. I never had the curiosity or understanding that I could find out where this was.
Mm.
I don't really know what was wrong with me. Then I didn't go find this place until 2018.
Wow.
Yep. That is 1930 or 31. I mean, look at how my father was dressed. That's his first wife, Hannah. I mean, and
Hmm.
he's got white tie, white gloves. You can see behind his elbow is his shiny top hat. I mean, and you can't see on this photo that her dress, it has a train to it. I mean, it's just spectacular. They had money, they had class, and I didn't know that. And that's one of the letters. That's
Yeah.
from September 1949. And you can see at the very top, if you can, that's his name, Haskell Schlüsselberg, Stuttgart. And there's an address, and that's where Yeva's brother lived around the corner. But that's the writing. I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't even know what to say about it.
So when it says import, was that the business he was in?
Yeah,
Or
yeah, it's importer of, chicken, eggs,
uh-huh.
imported and exotic, fruits and vegetables. I don't know where he imported from and to whom he sold, but this was his stationery that he wrote all of those letters on, all, except for when he was up in Bremenhaven waiting for the ship to take him to America. All of the letters were written on this paper.
Wow.
And all over. Yeah. Anyway, and that's my book. That's
Yeah.
that's them. That's my parents. And in a way, that photo to me seemed so emblematic of his desire and her reluctance in a way. She
Yeah.
looks at us and she holds him a bit at bay, and he wants,
Mm.
he wants, and he can't have her.
Interesting interpretation of that. Yeah. Yeah.
And this photo is not in the book, but again, that's my father standing up. Look at that tie. Look at how great. Oh my goodness. And so the man is his brother. The man who's sitting down is his brother, his older brother, and the woman on the left is Yenta, Tante Yenta, who I knew, who, because everybody was related, it's complicated, but I'll only tell you that Tante Yenta was my mother's mother sister. It's a little too much to even, but my
It
father, it's too much. But my father is from a family of 8 children. My grandmother had 8 children, and they were cousins. And these two were first these two were first cousins. But my father and my mother were second cousins.
Right. I think it's very common in a lot of Jewish families from Eastern Europe.
Yeah.
It's very common. Now, what was this? This is something from your dad's school?
Yes. So I was doing a concert. This is after I went to Germany. Uh, but later that year, Frank and I were doing a concert in Krakow, at the Jewish festival there. And my father's hometown of Szczygłow was like 2 hours away. And so I hired a driver who himself did research and found report cards from my father and his siblings from 1907, 1908,
Wow.
so on a certain level, to the listeners and watchers of this program, Sheila, I would say there's stuff out there if you want to look for it.
Right, right. It spurs other people on to try to find out information about their past history too. No
Yep.
question. Yeah.
Yep. And this was my my father's parents' home in Szczygłow. They're up on the balcony there. This is their cow. The 2 handsome men on either side of them are 2 of my father's brothers. The one on the right, Elle, I met during his life once or twice. I don't know who the boy was. I don't know who the boy was or the other man. But I can just say that my father, who lived the last quarter of his life as a sweatshop worker, came from a family who had dough.
Mm.
This is my mother's family. And so that's my mother who's standing, whose grandfather is holding her with his big hand. That's my mother. And
Mhm.
the people standing are the second woman from the right is my grandmother, her mother, who's sisters with Tante Yenta, and these are other siblings. And the boy sitting on the table is my uncle Leibel, and
Mhm.
all of them, except for 2 of those 5, were killed. Uh, 3 of them survived, and of course, the parents were killed.
Wow. Wow.
That's my father, and that's me.
And you.
Yeah, that's me. And I was the light of his life, I would say.
Mm.
That's my mother, and that's my brother Seymour, who I lived with. And he didn't know anything about Harry either. He didn't know
Really?
my father was married either until I found out. I mean, it's kind of unbelievable that his life too was a bit awakened by this book, for plus and minus, but it was awakened by
Sure.
this book.
Your mother is very pretty.
Thank you. She was beautiful.
Mm.
That's my brother on that street in Brooklyn in East New York. Skinny little guy. I love this photo. This might be like my favorite photo. It was in a bungalow colony in South Fallsburg, and it was that's me, of course, in the middle, and the guy holding me is my grandfather, Itche, and to his right is my grandmother, and to her right is my mother, and the other two are cousins.
So
But
what was the cake for?
it
The
was
birth?
it was their anniversary. It was my
Ah,
grandparents' anniversary. Yeah,
so you
and
were in a,
they were
you
love
were,
personified, those two. And I think you might see a photo of them coming up when you can see their lives at a different time.
right.
I
So
think the
you went
next
to the Catskills, a bungalow colony in the Catskills.
my whole life.
Mm-hmm. All right. Ah,
Oh, well,
there's the.
that's the wall. Yeah, it was. It totally. Um, it devastated me. I would
There's
say.
the right next to your pocket.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You can.
Schana Schlesselberg and
And
Frida
free.
Schlesselberg.
Yeah,
Your father's first wife, Hannah, and your half sister, Frida.
yeah.
And you look like you've just suffered a big emotional awakening. Yeah,
It was really. I was really. I was finished. Really, I was
yeah.
finished. And that was the last day of my trip in Germany. I mean, yeah,
And I just copied that from the book.
yeah.
Um,
That's really that's it.
yeah,
I stand leaning against the Jews, looking directly into her camera, broken and indignant. They are all gone, but I am here. I am them.
Mhm.
Yeah. And that's Yeva. That's beautiful Yeva, who was my guide and primary translator.
And you also said that when you were there, the weather was pretty bad the whole time, right? You
Rained
didn't
every
have,
day, miserable,
yeah.
miserable, every single day. This is an old photo when I acted in a play that went to Munich for
Oh, so
some
you were in
Jewish
Dach,
festival.
yeah.
So we went to Dachau. This is the composer Rosalie Gerut, whose
Uh-huh.
mother was also in a camp, and she and I went to Dachau and were shocked primarily by how close it was to Munich, that it was a suburban
Yeah.
town.
Right.
It
You
was
just you
shocking.
just take you take a short commuter rail ride to the lovely town of Dachau, but then you
Yeah,
take a bus to the camps.
yeah,
And yeah. When you were
shocking.
there, did you think of maybe I should try to visit Auschwitz where my dad was? Or
Um,
no?
well, I mean, when I was in Krakow, people were going to Auschwitz, but I never went. And now I feel like I don't feel like I have to go. I feel like my father did his time, and let other people go. I don't have to go. I feel like,
Well,
yeah. I mean,
he
I don't
painted
know.
that he painted a picture for you. You don't need to go.
No,
It's tomorrow.
yeah, yeah.
And this is in Israel.
This is in Israel with it. They had a dinner there were three of us, three fellows who happened to be women. Um, and it's a place where Muslim, Christian, and Jew all, in a very, for the most part, live harmoniously. It's complicated and it's not always so, but it's really a model of what's possible. That's one of the fellows. She's from New Zealand. And that was where I would write. Yeah, it was great. It's a beautiful town.
And is that where you would read that information about
No,
Auschwitz?
no,
Where
no,
did you
no.
do the reading?
In my
room?
room. In my room, yeah. This I could only write here, because the light was too bright to read on the computer, really. So
Yeah.
this was just a place to write. I couldn't really read here.
And
Well,
that, I think, is a
well,
beautiful
that.
photo. Yeah.
Yeah. Was is Gavain. What was, and that was. It's hard to believe that that's what it was at one time.
Well, people should know that you are a very well-known cabaret singer in Yiddish, as well as your writing and directing and so forth. All right, let's go back to finish up our talk. So, Eleanor, I always like to have people have the last word. So I'm going to ask you, now that we've had a talk and have a great understanding of your book and what it meant to you to do it, what is there now you would most like to say as a concluding remark? What would you most like to tell me?
It's really a hard thing to say, except I guess what I would tell you is I'm grateful now. I mean, and I try to remember to be grateful, and I am, I mean, I'm 69 years old. I just turned 69 yesterday, and what now is an interesting question. And to thine own self be true. So I'm just grateful, Sheila, and I'm so grateful to have had this time and your understanding of the book and of the insights, and makes it all worth it, really. I get kind of worked up sometimes that there's no reviews. Why isn't it in the Times? Why hasn't the Washington Post reviewed it? And I kind of get into a spin about what has not happened.
Yeah.
But a lot has happened, and the book is reaching a lot of people. People are really responding to it. So I'm glad you're reminding me of what's good and how people take this away and how they understand me and my family and my father. And that was the point, really. I didn't want his life to have been for nothing. He was here. He was here, and he was a man, and he just had a crummy deck of cards that his life was. So anyway, I'm really grateful. So thank you.
Okay, and thank you. And it's one connection at a time, that one person at a time, and then we share with others and we take it from there. So thank you so much for sharing this time with us. The book is The Letters Project by Eleanor Reissa. It's available everywhere, Amazon, everywhere. And good luck to you in your career. And we will stay in touch and see you all next time on Talkback. Bye.
Bye. Thank you, Sheila.